Thank you. So welcome to this meeting of the Cabinet. In addition to the Cabinet members and other councillors present in the room, we will also have some councillors joining our meeting remotely, and I'll now check that they can hear us and we them. We have Councillor Terry James.
He sends his apologies, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews. Councillor Lester.
Yes, I can see you and hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bob Matthews.
Yeah, see you and hear you. Thank you.
Councillor Fagan. Councillor Wilding.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I can hear and see.
And Councillor Swinglehurst.
Good afternoon, Leader. Yes, I can hear and see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also have a number of officers attending who will be introduced as they are called upon. I will now formally open the meeting. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Microphones should be muted when you are not speaking. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meetings, provided that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. As we move through the agenda, in addition to discussion by Cabinet members, I will invite group leaders and their representatives in turn to provide views and questions from their group on each item. Where appropriate, I will also call on scrutiny chairpersons to comment on behalf of their committee. Voting will be undertaken by a show of hands in the room. Only Cabinet members may vote. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Have any apologies been notified to the clerk?
Yes, Leader, I've had apologies from Councillor Tyler, across Cabinet members. I've also had apologies from Councillors Howells, Bartlett, Jimmer and Watson.
Thank you. I've also had apologies from Councillor Davis. She may join us later on in the meeting. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interest for items on the agenda today? I see none. Thank you. Item 3, to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held, or meetings, 2 of them held on the 22nd of July and the 29th of July 2021. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Cabinet members, are you content that the minutes are an accurate record? Please indicate by showing hands. Thank you. Thank you. Unanimous. Moving on to item 4, to receive any questions from members of the public. We have received 3 questions from members of the public for the meeting, and a response has been published as a supplement to the agenda papers. Those members of the public who have submitted questions have the opportunity to submit a written supplementary or to join the meeting to ask their questions live. So if the clerk would let us know how to run through this particular item. The first question is Mr. Wilmot.
Mr. Wilmot has not supplied a supplementary question, Leader.
And is not present in person either. Miss Albright.
Again, she's not supplied a written supplementary and she's not present.
Thank you. And Mr. Albright.
I have a written supplementary question.
Thank you.
It is encouraging to hear that the Council agrees with Natural England in that the greatest positive impact upon river ecology restoration in the Wye will come from changing agricultural practice. However, as we enter the 3rd year of a crippling housing moratorium, we remain deeply concerned that the punishment for the cumulative issues within the agricultural sector are being borne by local construction companies and rural communities. Can the Council explain why their planning moratorium is only applied to housing and commercial development in the Lead catchment, and clarify if there are any plans for the moratorium to be extended to the wider catchment and to agricultural developments?
Harrington. Harrington,
Yes, thank you, Leader. Thank you, Mr. Albright. At the moment, there's no plans to extend the moratorium. And as I explained in my original answer, we are not the people who have put the requirements in terms of neutrality or betterment, in terms of phosphate load, it is Natural England. And as he knows, we're trying to find mechanisms to get through that mitigation in terms of the wetlands, which should hopefully, one of our first wetlands should hopefully shortly be online, going through the planning application process and available for trading of credits. We have had other discussions with Natural England and the EA and our MPs to see what we can do in relation to considering in the future source apportionment, making a differential between agriculture or housing, new housing. But unfortunately, none of that is in our hands. It is all entirely in the hands of national agencies. And we continue to press on this issue.
Councillor Harrington. Moving on then to item 5, to receive any questions from councillors. We received one question from a councillor for this meeting. The response has been published as a supplement to the agenda papers. I believe this councillor has submitted a written supplementary. Sarah, I don't know whether you read that over to us, please.
Yes. Councillor Watson asks that how many compliance checklists have been completed since their inception as a percentage compared to those who don't?
Well, I'm going to have to provide a written answer to that question, which we'll send to Councillor Watson as soon as the information is available. It should be to hand to the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. So moving on then to item number 6, we have 2 substantive items today. Item 6 is the environmental building design standards. This paper seeks agreement to approve the output of the proposed environmental building design standards, which will set the standard for future developments and retrofit housing schemes undertaken by the council across the county. This item begins on page 45 of the agenda pack. And Councillor Tyler is involved in a community safety event for a few days. She's asked that Councillor Eddie Chowns introduce this topic.
Thank you, Leader. Colleagues, I'm really delighted presenting this work to you today and warmly recommend it decision. This work forms part of our housing project. You know, we have as an administration said that we will take bold, innovative steps to improve things in our county. And a key part of that is our decision to build affordable net zero carbon housing for local residents. As part of that work, Councillor Tyler and myself have been involved over a number of months with officers and expert support, working to develop the specification for exactly what those standards should be. And that is the document that is in front of us today. For absolute clarity, this is a document that sets the standards for the housing that the council will build. There is a separate process going on, development of a supplementary planning document, which will drive up environmental building standards in the county as a whole. And that will go through a whole long formal consultation process, a full engagement with stakeholders and so forth. Lots of opportunity for everybody to feed in on that. This document is specifically about the building projects that we do ourselves as a council on our housing project. And it signals our ambition to make real the concept of net zero carbon housing and sets out exactly how we will do that. I understand that we've had an architect, John Christopher's, advising us through this process, and he's with us in the meeting today, so he's able to answer technical questions. We've also got Mark Willimont, who's able to answer questions from the office side. I'm personally really excited about this work. You know, we've recognised unanimously, collectively, as a council in 2019, the urgency of the climate emergency and now the ecological emergency. We know that new buildings have got to be zero carbon. We've already got 85,000 old homes in Herefordshire, and retrofitting them, getting them to zero carbon standard is a massive challenge. We shouldn't be adding to the housing stock by building new buildings that will then need retrofitting later down the line. You know, the government nationally, internationally fully recognise the climate emergency, and so this is about kind of putting our policy where our mouth is and committing to zero carbon standards. I do just want to raise one thing as a proposal. I'm not sure where this fits in the meeting, but in prior discussions about this, we were discussing the text of the report, and I'd like to request the removal of paragraph 7 in the report, which I think is duplicated by material in the resources implication section, and doesn't fully recognise the reality that although passive houses in certain circumstances slightly more expensive than conventional building standards, actually, as the report sets out, there is very considerable evidence that the costs are coming down massively, that we're essentially close to parity now. And we have recognised as an administration that we need to adopt these standards. And one of the moving parts, the many moving parts in deciding on individual site viability, will be these standards, together with a whole other set of things like tenure and so forth. So I think Para 7 is unhelpful and confusing, and I'd like to request that that's removed from the report. So I warmly commend these standards to you, really happy to answer any questions on them myself, and also we have support in the room able to do that too.
Thank you, Councillor Chair. So, do you want Mr. Christopher to ask any comments, or we go straight to cabinet members?
Yes, very happy to invite John Christopher to add anything if you'd like to.
I think Mr. Christopher will ask you to deal with questions as they come along. I might have some myself, so I think we'll go first of all to Councillor Norman. I think was to speak to this.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very, very pleased to be able to speak in support of this. Many of us for some years have been lobbying for these standards, both within the council and the wider community, at least 10 years that I'm aware of, which means at least 10 years worth of housing needing retrofit that we will have to do something about. It's great that we've got to this point. We're aware, it's well illustrated in the report, the benefits of the environment, obviously reducing energy demand, reducing carbon output, saving water, so on and so on. I particularly wanted to focus on the health benefits. It's hugely important that housing is of a quality which will not add to people's poor health. We know that many people do live in housing that's very poor quality, very damp, very cramped, totally unsuitable in many instances, and this can lead to respiratory and other illnesses. So we absolutely need to improve our housing, the quality of our housing, for many, many reasons, that being one of them, and things like air quality, green spaces around our houses, warmer homes, of course, all these things will help to ensure that our communities are healthier and their well-being is ensured. Lower bills, of course, is another one, very important too. So we're talking about affordable housing if it's not affordable to run that household and to pay the bills. Mention's been made of things like developing important skills and job opportunities. I think all these things are fantastically important. And just to add that I think if we set the standard, I know we can only do this with our own housing and building, but if we set the standard, then we can begin to push out into the community and encourage and expect far better standards from those developers also working within the county. So for lots of very good reasons, I'm really happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Norman. I was quite interested to see that Paris Council recently completed the building of some passive house properties just across the border from us. It's about half a dozen properties, I think. And I just wonder, Mr. Christopher, is this a national thing? Are there many local authorities that are adopting this kind of approach? I don't know whether you're aware of that sort of national intelligence.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yes. No, very happy to answer the question. Thank you. And I think we're in a position where the government is consulting on a literal national standard, the Future Homes Standard, but has indicated that that won't be coming into force for quite a number of years. So there is, as it were, a policy vacuum at the moment. But I'm pleased to say that Herefordshire are certainly not alone in wanting to set a higher standard. And as the Herefordshire Future Homes document makes clear, other leading local authorities such as Exeter have been doing passive house for quite a number of years now. There was a scheme in Norwich of social housing about 2 years ago, which attracted widespread acclaim. York are doing it, etc., etc. There's in fact a vanguard scheme which the Good Homes Alliance has set up, a not-for-profit body which is trying to coordinate the efforts of many different local authorities and other housing providers towards building, quote, net zero now. And so I think this is very much a national push, and I think we will see, as these standards become embedded in contractors' minds and in the industry and become much more the norm, then if there is a cost differential, that will reduce so that this will become the new norm, as it were. So I hope that answers the question.
As you also mentioned, passive house, are there other similar standards which could apply, or is passive house the only one?
Yes, indeed. There's quite a range of different standards. The AECB, the Association for Environmental Conscious Building, has a standard. The RIBA has introduced a standard relatively recently. LETI, the London Energy Transition Initiative, has a standard. And in the Herefordshire Future Homes document, we compare these different standards with one another. So I think into the somewhat of a policy vacuum at the moment, as I've described nationally, I think there are a number of different standards which have come to the fore. One of the reasons that we're advocating the Passive House standard, in fact, the Passive House Plus standard, which is one of the family of Passive House standards for Herefordshire Future Homes, is that this has become much more widely understood in the industry in the last few years. I think if you go back 10 years ago, there were hardly any homes in the UK which were built to the Passive House standard, but there's now an increasing number. There's a lot of training available. The expertise in the industry is there, whereas some of the other standards are still very unfamiliar in the industry. And I think as well, one should also highlight that the Passive House standard has an independent accreditation, which adds only a very, very small amount to the total capital cost of the project, but ensures that the compliance with the standard in the actual finished building. And that is in contrast with homes built to building regulation standards, which can be as much as 60% adrift of those standards, because there's a very different, less rigorous certification process. So there are other standards, but I think this is by far the best one at the moment to be espousing.
Great, thank you very much. I think Councillor Harrington.
Thank you. I just wanted to check with Mr. Christophers that the stats, because we're often accused of not or doing token, making token efforts to try and reduce our carbon emissions. But can I just check the stats are correct that 49% of the UK's CO2 or equivalent emissions are coming from housing, and in Herefordshire 26% is, because that's a very large amount, and so it makes this focus very, very important.
Yes, just to clarify the two figures, the 49% is a figure for the total CO2 emissions from building in the UK. That's a figure produced by the LETI, the London Energy Transformation Initiative, but that includes housing and buildings and the construction industry. There are other different measures inevitably, but that is the impact of all that. I think the figure nationally is that about 20% of carbon emissions come from housing, and the 26% figure reflects Hereford's particular circumstances. So it is, I think, by any, however you look at the figures, it's a massive chunk of carbon. I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you.
Very much. I think I now turn to group leaders for any questions, observations. First of all, Councillor Lester.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. No. On behalf of the Conservative group, I think there's some really good points, and in particular, any document that stresses the good quality of a home, I think is something that we really acknowledge is a great thing, a great aspiration to have, and so that's good quality for all kinds of reasons, well-being and environmental issues as well. So that's a good goal, good aspiration to have, and a good goal that should be met. It also chimes with something that I've been really quite passionate about, which is addressing fuel poverty. And that is a big problem for Herefordshire, and this will go a long way to try and address that with future housing. But it may be a topic for another time, but it would be very interesting to get an update on how the council is faring with addressing fuel poverty, because of the nature of the buildings in Herefordshire, it is a real problem. So it would be good to get some update on where we are with that, because I was aware that there were some really good initiatives taking place, but it would be great to have an update on where we are. The document itself, if we can just go to 7.5, and it mentions it in the report about housing in an area that, and building housing in ways that doesn't exacerbate flooding issues. I'm just wondering, as a question for the cabinet members to consider, is the document explicit enough about positioning housing in places that don't exacerbate flooding? Because we're aware of planning applications that have come forward where there is a flooding issue, and we're assured that there are drainage ways of dealing with the drainage, but that members of the public remain very skeptical and very frightened about the fact that new housing will exacerbate flooding. So could the document do with being a little bit more explicit on not looking to approve housing in locations where there is this risk of runoff and flooding to existing dwellings? Because I know from planning committee, that's something that gets flagged up quite a lot. So just a request for an update on fuel poverty, and just to wonder whether or not it should be more explicit about the risks of flooding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. I don't know whether there's anybody particularly present who'd like to talk about either of those issues, the fuel poverty one, perhaps Councillor Chowns.
I can respond to both of those. Should I do so now, or,
Yes, I think so.
each? Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Councillor Lester. Really kind of agree with your point. As you've highlighted, these standards are about high quality of housing. They're not just about the carbon impact, but they're about things like the the wider quality, green space, biodiversity, livability of the housing, and of course affordability of heating, as Councillor Norman mentioned, and you have done yourself. Building zero carbon housing is really good for people because it really tackles fuel poverty. It basically eliminates fuel poverty in those houses. What I'm not sure if everybody has picked up on, but the report makes really explicit, is that actually there's a connection between adopting these standards and tackling fuel poverty in the county more widely, because the ideal way that we propose to offset any residual carbon impact that we can't eliminate through improving the building standards, there's always going to be some impact of some sort. So we are proposing to offset that through investment in retrofitting the existing housing stock, so that existing residents will also benefit from the council adopting these standards for new builds. You might also recall that in the July cabinet meeting, we approved £50,000 to be spent on a retrofit strategy. So we are very much aware that those 85,000 houses in the county are crying out for more work to retrofit them. That is a separate project, but it's absolutely something that's a very high priority. Unfortunately, there's been a gross lack of investment in this area from central government. The funding streams that did come on stream in the last year or two have been unfortunately pretty poorly run. There's been lots of publicity about that, very difficult for people to access them. So we recognise that as a council, we really need to step up on that, because that is a really major ongoing issue. At a cabinet meeting later in this month, we'll have the quarterly performance report, which reports that we've just upgraded 115 park homes with Green Homes grants. We've installed central heating in another 70 homes. So there's a lot of ongoing work. I think about £1 million worth in the last year, ballpark sort of figure, actually tackling that fuel poverty question. But it is a much, much bigger challenge than that. So thank you for highlighting it. And regarding housing not exacerbating flooding, again, a good point. I actually think that that's a point that's particularly relevant to the SPD that I talked about in my introduction. So that's about the county-wide approach to planning for housing and standards for housing. So I'll take an action to make sure that that does get fed into the draft SPD on environmental building standards that absolutely needs to recognise that. I can't off the top of my head remember what mention there is in that, but I will check that, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chance. Moving on then to Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Chairman. A few points. Myself and my colleagues are quite enthusiastic about these proposals. Like all things, you know, there's a lot to be found out and explained before we, fully go ahead with it. One thing that I've noticed, that the attached photographs of schemes elsewhere are very attractive, and what caught my eye was generous landscaping, which not only makes it pleasant and right for the people living there, but for the environment generally. So I think it's so important to have that sort of surrounding. Now, could I just ask the architect, please? Now, the cost. How does the cost of one of these new premises compare to the current ways of construction? How do they compare to the present system in cost about? And the other thing that perhaps Councillor Chowd or somebody could answer, it also says that the passive house in conjunction with other forms of constructions would reduce 106 contributions to pay for that. Well, that's fine, but when you're reducing 106, that money has to be found somewhere else. So it's the cost that's worrying me at the moment. And if we can address that, and if the architect could tell me, please, what's the difference in the construction of a house in the current traditional ways and the new ones being proposed? So give example of a 3-bedroom house.
Thank you, Councillor Matthews, and thank you for your supportive comments. And I totally agree about the quality of landscaping being important. Thank you. And on the specific point of cost, I must just caveat, I'm sure you'll understand these remarks by saying that we're in a market economy, and the cost of something is dependent on a building contractor putting in a tender which is at an acceptable level. So I don't have a magic wand to wave on what the specific cost will be for each specific site. But if we can just leave that to one side, what I have included in the report is evidence of a number of different studies which have been carried out looking at comparative costs. And I think the headline study is by the Passive House Trust, which has looked at the cost going forward of passive house schemes being roughly plus 4% on capital cost. If you look backwards, then there was more of a differential. I think Exeter found 10 years ago they were paying plus 25%, but as passive house has become much more familiar, as I was explaining earlier, that has come down. There's another study that suggests about 5%. But we're talking, and there's another one, in fact, which suggests 2% on capital cost. So I think this is a fluid game as the industry sort of gets up to speed on these things. So I think there is a modest additional cost. I think there's no getting away from that at the moment. But I think it needs to be offset against the point which Councillor Chance raised earlier, that if we fail to build to this standard, then the cost of retrofitting the new homes that we would be building to a lesser standard will be about 5 times more. In fact, the study behind that says between 5 and 10 times more expensive to rip apart a newly built house to then upgrade it. So I think much the simplest way and the simplest time, for instance, to put in a triple glazed window is when you build the house. So I hope that answers the question. I can provide more detailed figures, but those are the headlines.
That's fine, thank you. Just one other small thing. what feedback have you had from the tenants of people who have occupied the schemes elsewhere in the country? Are they happy with the surroundings, or what's their general response to those buildings?
Overwhelmingly positive, I'm very pleased to report. In fact, the scheme which I referenced earlier in Norwich, which you may have seen, it was extensively publicised about 2 years ago in Norwich. And speaking to the people who are responsible behind that, the chief executive in Norwich is on the record as saying our greatest, although it's won a number of architectural and other awards and civic awards and so forth, but the chief executive maintains that our greatest advocates are our tenants, because they see hugely improved, reduced fuel bills, they see much better quality, less antisocial behaviour, less rent arrears because people are not so hard up paying fuel bills, etc., etc. So there are multiple benefits, and I think it's been very, very positively received.
Thank you.
Christopher, thank you very much. You put the case very strongly. Councillor Harvey wanted to make an observation.
Yes, I just wanted to assure Councillor Matthews that doing this for buildings, community buildings, and also for houses that the council builds in the future does stack up financially. And there's quite a lot of information in the report under section 5, benefits and analysis, which goes through in some detail, not just the what capital costs are expected to be, but also the through life costs, and also some information about the costs savings for people living in those homes, tenants or owning residents. So from page 58 of the agenda pack onwards, hopefully that will give you some assurance.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I merely mentioned it because obviously we're going to experience extremely difficult financial times over the coming years. That's the reason why I mentioned it, whether we'll be able to get these schemes off the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to Councillor Wilding. Councillor Wilding, I wonder whether you perhaps don't wish to speak. See you.
His reception's pretty bad. Leader.
Hello, I'm back.
There.
I've just had to relocate to another room nearer my Wi-Fi, so hopefully I won't drop out again. Were you saying that I had a chance to say something now?
If you wish to, Councillor Wilding, please do.
Okay, thanks. Let me just get my notes out here. The Independents for Herefordshire obviously think this is a fantastic report. The whole point of the Independents for Herefordshire joining with the Green Party in a coalition was to start bringing things and innovations like this through to the council. So we wholeheartedly, back this report and think it's fantastic. I do note that Councillor Chowns said in her introduction that this is just for houses that the council are providing. So I just want to, and I know that you'll come back to me and say that's got nothing to do with this, but the majority of houses built in Herefordshire, and I know this from being on the planning committee, are still taking no notice of these sort of things. And so along with this report, I would really like to see the council make even more efforts to try and convince government to start looking at these suggestions of how passive house and other types of things are brought into the new planning laws, so that all houses can be like this, because developers and individual builders just aren't interested at the moment. So we need to make an effort to get them to do that. But coming back to this report, yeah, I think it's brilliant. And I hope that we can get this as a reality as soon as possible. One thing I noticed, as well as Councillor Matthews in the report, is a lot of the houses, well, all the pictures of houses show houses that are quite modern designed and have south-facing roofs and all this sort of stuff. But when you get out there in the real world, all the developers and the people all want sort of mock Tudor mansions and stuff like that, which don't lend themselves to become as well insulated, as good a passive house as possible. So I hope that the buildings that we design do reflect these more modern designs that are shown in this report. The other thing I wanted to just say is the report does talk a couple of times about south-facing roofs, but I don't see a lot in it about absolutely demanding that the orientation of new houses is such that the main roofs are south-facing. So I'd like to see a little bit more in the report like that. And I just wondered what the architect feels about that. Does the architect feel that it's as easy to build houses that are orientated with large south-facing roofs? What was else? Because at the moment, I think people are designing housing estates to fit round the car, to fit in as many garages and car parking spaces before they even consider the orientation of the house and the way the roofs are going to flow. And as has been said many times already, it's more expensive to retrofit, and it really is more expensive to jack the whole house up and swivel it so that it's facing south. So I'd like to see that. Thanks very much.
Thank you. If I may just address that question, and firstly, thank you so much for your very positive comments on the report. But specifically on orientation, I think there are two technically there are two important things to bear in mind. One is that if the windows of a passive house are facing more or less south, plus or minus 15 degrees, then you have optimum benefit in terms of the winter sun coming in and helping to provide as much as a third of the heating of that house. Now, on some sites that may not be possible. If it's rather less due south, then the contribution is correspondingly less. But it's certainly totally unnecessary, I would say, to have big windows facing north. So there should be a substantial gain, even if there are constraints on orientation with that. When it comes to putting on solar panels on the roof, it's a slightly different equation, that if you're facing more or less south, plus or minus 45 degrees, there's not a big cutoff, and an optimum roof pitch of 30 degrees gives you the main benefit, but other pitches are possible. So what I would say, therefore, bearing in mind those technical points, is that on I think every site that I've come across, it's possible to get most of the way to a solution here. It requires an intelligent architect, it requires imaginative design, and certainly I wholeheartedly endorse that it shouldn't be a design, a layout which is predicated on the car. I think if we can prioritize the existing trees on the site, we can prioritize pedestrians, play, all the quality of landscaping, as has been mentioned, and we can thread houses around it, all of which have a southerly aspect. I think it's perfectly possible, and a number of layouts have demonstrated this, some of which are illustrated in the document, although I appreciate I haven't included plans. So I would say with good design, it is certainly possible to get the majority of the benefits, even on challenging sites. Interestingly, I think the main challenge perhaps is not so much the particular site and its orientation, but the proximity of large existing trees. I think that's one of the main constraints that is a challenge, but I think it's certainly possible to get this working. And I also, just perhaps in response to your point about mock Tudor and so forth, I think it's interesting. Again, I'm delighted that you support the more modern approach. We are in the 21st century now, of course, rather than the 19th century. But it's interesting to note that if you have, for instance, leaded lights on a window, then they actually constrict the amount of light which comes through that window. And with a modern window, the heat loss through the middle of the window is actually less than through the frame of the window. So larger sheets of glass, smaller frames are actually much better in terms of energy efficiency. And I think we're at a stage where a sort of, perhaps a new architectural typology is emerging, is on the threshold of emerging, where you have these larger south-facing roofs, you have south-facing glass, etc. And I hope that I'm delighted that Herefordshire wants to be in the vanguard of that this new sort of this new movement. Really, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much. I was going to comment on the mock Tudor houses because I'm quite sure that any builders who are on this call will be saying, that their house they are building in Herefordshire, they are paying a lot of attention to climate change and that sort of thing. We do have some excellent builders in Herefordshire who are, I'm sure, building mock Tudor houses in the most cost-effective way. You mentioned about lobbying. Perhaps Councillor Chowns might be able to mention something about that, what we're doing for national building standards, or maybe not.
That wasn't actually the main thing I was going to say, but I can say that we're part of networks such as the Countryside Climate Network, which is lobbying the government on improving building standards more generally. I was going to just pick up on a couple of points that Councillor Wilding made, if that's okay, just very briefly, and supplement what John Christopher has said. So first of all, on the kind of standards and, should every house be kind of south facing exactly and so forth, these standards, they're not a kind of, you have to build it exactly like this. There's some wiggle room in there because every site is individual. What they focus on is the outcomes that we want to achieve in terms of, they specify the level of energy efficiency of the building overall. There's some flexibility within those standards because, every bit of land, every kind of house, every type of house and need is different. So I think that they strike a really good balance between real clarity about what it means to achieve zero carbon and design around, people's lives and so forth. Landscaping and all the rest of it, while at the same time leaving some flexibility about individual circumstances. And they do reference the National Model Design Code, I think it's called, and the Emerging Local Design Code as well. So that kind of business of design, which includes the wider design, as Councillor Matthews mentioned, of the landscaping and the outer environment, whether you're designing around cars or around people's mobility, all of that is kind of really clearly captured within them. Just on the wider point that you made, Councillor Wilding, about, what about the rest of the houses that are being built? That is precisely what the Environmental Building Standards SPD supplementary planning document that I mentioned at the beginning and that is mentioned in the report for this. That is what that is about. And we've worked hard to make sure that the work that we're doing on our own standards is kind of integrated with kind of working alongside the work that's being done on that Environmental Building Standard SPD, which, as I mentioned, will be going out to consultation shortly. And I know that it's already got, it's got a draft chapter that says loads and loads about orientation and all of those sorts of matters. So I very much hope that by us adopting these standards, we'll really help to drive up standards more widely in the county. That's a kind of stepwise approach. We've got our climate and ecology checklists at the moment. The SPD will add more weight and will give kind of more guidance in order to interpret the matters that are already, the policies already in our core strategy. And then, of course, we will be updating our core strategy, driving up those standards locally at the same time as lobbying for national amendments to planning legislation to be in line with the national commitment to net zero carbon, which is a legally binding target, of course. So I think what we're doing here is absolutely in line with, but possibly a little bit of a step ahead of what national government is doing, and that's no bad thing. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Chowns made the proposal that paragraph 7 be deleted, and I'll ask in a moment if anybody has any objection to that. But I think in paragraph 14, we have to be aware that these standards and property development which the council gets involved in will almost certainly have to come to a further meeting of cabinet to look at the implications, and at that stage that the concerns are about liability, they can be raised at that level. It's not a case of science at this stage. We're open-minded, but the proposal is to remove paragraph 7. Anybody that removal? Anybody Do you want it to stay in? I see it's nodding heads. We'll remove number 7. Thank you. So I'll put this recommendation to.
Leader, could I ask a brief question of our architect? Extremely brief, if you kind.
Well, you have to really brief, Councillor Matthews.
It will. All I was going to ask him is, what's the view of his fellow architects throughout the country? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a difficult one to answer. I will be brief. I think many more architects, I think, have got it about climate change than the general population. So I think there's a lot of support in the profession, but I won't pretend that there aren't some dinosaurs who haven't quite yet got it. But I think most of us understand this is the way forward, and we just have to get up to speed.
Thank you, Leader.
Okay, so I've got this recommendation. It's a recommendation that the Herefordshire Future Homes report be approved with the deletion of and B, the recommendations in the report adopted as the recognised standards for future housing developments and retrofit work undertaken by the council, but that paragraph 7 of the report be deleted. All those in favour, show of hands. Thank you very much. So that is recommendation is adopted. So I'll move on then to variation to West Mercia Energy Joint Agreement, and this is Councillor Harvey to introduce.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Herefordshire Council is one of 4 council partners who jointly own West Mercia Energy, which is an energy trading company, which helps the councils reduce their energy costs by buying energy futures and by managing the contracts under which we get our energy supplied. This paper is about a change in the way that the formula is derived, by which the profits of the operating benefits of the company are shared amongst the 4 owning councils. Presently, the overall operating costs of the business are distributed pro rata according to the amount of energy purchased by each of the authorities. So basically the amount of business that each authority puts with West Mercia Energy. And the proposal is that we change that so that there is an equal share of the operating costs that are borne by each of the shareholding authorities. Now, I draw your attention to paragraph 20 in the resource implications section, which gives an indication of the financial impact of this change in calculation based on the current energy use of the current energy purchasing of each of our authorities, and you can see that there's little impact for Telford and Wrekin and for Shropshire Council, but there is a more significant effect in terms of it there being less profit distributed received by Herefordshire Council and slightly more profit received by Worcestershire Council, and that's broadly a function of the amount of energy that each of our authorities is actually purchasing. Paragraph 21 shows the distribution payments received by Herefordshire Council in the previous 5 years. And there isn't a particular pattern there. There's a gradual dropping off of the payments that we've been receiving, but then a bit of a blip last year. that's partly down to West Mercia Energy acquiring other customers, and there being benefit in terms of the amount of business that they've been doing with other local authorities as a consequence, and other public sector organisations as a consequence of broadening their customer base, which is a good thing. But really what it's also showing is that Herefordshire Council's been needing to purchase less energy over the period as we have been reducing our energy consumption, which is a good thing. Broadly speaking, this is thought to be a better overall way of calculating how the profits are distributed for West Mercia Energy, even though it is slightly to our detriment. The benefit that we gain in terms of being a joint shareholder of this company and the savings that they provide us in our overall energy costs far outweigh this as a reduction in the amount of profits that we share. And broadly speaking, we think that this is a better longer term way of doing things. And as the report outlines, it also future-proofs members against there being changes in how the other share-owning councils engage with West Mercia Energy and the degree to which they choose to buy energy from them in the future. So on balance, although it doesn't look like it's in our favour particularly, as one of the 4 shareholders, we are actually recommending that this change is made to the calculation, and the detail of how that calculation is made is given in paragraph 11 of the report. So it's not working in our favour, but it's broadly the right thing to do. And I would be recommending that we adopt this proposed change to the calculation.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Anybody, any questions? It is quite a dry subject, formulas like this. I don't know whether, I think Councillor Harvey's given some sort of practical examples of the impact. I don't know whether Mr. Lovegrove, you have any other specific thoughts which might help us all to understand this?
Thank you, Leader. This same paper is going to the other 3 councils as well, so sadly we're inflicting this dry language across all the 4 member councils. As Councillor Harvey said, that the current arrangements are in place, but that doesn't encourage host councils to reduce that consumption, whereas this council has been very clear it wants to reduce its consumption. And paragraph 2, I think, it sums it up very clearly that this would ensure that other councils, if they want to change their margin or their consumption rates, that doesn't have an adverse effect on the other councils. So this has been making that very clear, because I suspect as we look forward to the future, this council set its sights very clear on reducing its consumption of energy and its net carbon position. Some of our other councils in the budget may be slightly behind us in that, so it's just making sure it's very clear that we don't suffer financial detriment if other have a step in those areas.
Thank you very much. I think if I may, I'll pass straight on to the leaders, starting off again with Councillor Lester.
Thank you. Yes, apologies. I must move on to another meeting. But before I go, I just wanted to make the general point that if these alterations are going to lead to a more equitable arrangement, then obviously we would support the changes. Take the note about it being quite a dry topic, but at the end of the day, if the arrangements aren't equitable, then they need to be adjusted accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lester. Moving on then to Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Leader. Just a couple of questions. I see that the council, schools, colleges, other public sector organisations currently purchase energy from WME. Can you tell me what's the difference in the cost from the natural grid and the from the WME. Is there a vast difference in the cost of energy?
Councillor Matthew, that isn't part of what this report is all about. We do have that information in the trading statements that come from West Mercia Energy. I'm very happy to forward you a copy of that so that you can look at the detail for yourself.
Yeah, that's fair enough, Councillor Harvey. It was just a matter of interest. The report itself, I think we're extremely lucky to have these facilities, and we were lucky that we went ahead with it a few years back, in which I'm pleased to say I played quite a role in it, me and my colleagues. So there we are. Fully support the report, and I also support the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Leader. Independents for Herefordshire are happy to support this. Happy to follow the Cabinet's lead. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll put this recommendation to the vote. The recommendation that the West Mercia Energy Joint Agreement be varied to update the formula, the distribution of the accumulated surplus each year, and B, the interim director of economy in place be authorised, following consultation with the solicitor, the council, and the section 151 officer, to finalise and execute variation. Shall I have all those in favour? Thank you very much, everybody in favour. So that concludes that item. Thank you to everybody for attending. The next meeting scheduled for Thursday of next week. The items on the agenda are the approval of the minerals waste local plan, and also approval of actions relating to the Heritage Action Zone. We've got a number of items on the agenda, or had a huge number of items this meeting, the next one, and the one after. There's been some reduction in those items. If we find we can get away with just having one meeting instead of two, we will work on that. And the monitoring officer will let everybody know if the meetings are to be reduced in number. So that brings the meeting to the end. Thank you very much, everybody. And please can I have confirmation that the live stream has stopped?